So again, for those who haven't had me before, you'll see on the right-hand side are what I call the 3 objectives for today. Today should be pretty easy. We're going to talk a little bit about thinking. And then we're going to talk about what good is logic. And then from John Paul II's Fides Ratio, because I do want to keep bringing theology into it, we'll look at how John Paul II talks about philosophy and how we use it to know ourselves and why that's important. So really, between today and Friday, I'm just making the case why we do this. All right? And then next week we'll start getting into content proper.
Bless you.
I will tell you what you should or should not write down. In other words, if I put something up there and say, you don't need to write this down, here's your clue. Okay? This is one of those things. You just need to know it. I don't know how you couldn't know this. In your life, you're either going to think about thinking or you're not going to think about thinking. And I can't imagine that you enjoy talking to the latter. I mean, you know how hard it is to have a discussion with somebody who refuses to be reasonable. I'm not saying that, maybe they don't want to discuss everything to the last blessed detail, but they won't even engage in a conversation, or they're just talking in a way that you can't make sense. You usually find people in an argument, they'll say, I don't care what you say, this is what I think. Now, there might be legitimate times that you say that, but most of the time people say that, they just don't want to engage you. Remember last year when I said about the enemies of learning, right? Ignorance, apathy, anxieties of life, they're always there. Sometimes we just get so busy with everything else going on in our life, and we never choose between goods and evils, typically. We're usually choosing between competing goods. Sometimes we have dullness of mind. We're just not grasping it. We don't have the patience to work through it. Other times, we just don't care. And that's really the worst. If you remember, I talked that everything I talk is relational. So if you're dating somebody and you're in a fight and you're yelling at each other or arguing, at least you're communicating. And you may not like it, but that's a lot better than them pretending you don't exist, refusing to return your text, refusing to answer a call, not looking at you when they see you, treating you like you just don't exist. That's apathy. That's a hard thing to overcome, all right? So we all are at various levels, but education, if you remember, is to bring us from those things to understanding, to wisdom, to knowledge, right? So that's what we're really trying to do. So logic really is just us thinking about thinking. And that may sound funny. My daughters, years ago, saw a book on my shelf by Mortimer J. Adler that said how to read a book. They thought that was funny. How do you read a book if you don't know how to read a book? I said, well, it's not how do I literally read English. It's how do I understand and comprehend the material. And it should be required reading for everybody. It changes the way you look at things, okay? So anyway, it is a lot of reading. So here's, I want your suggestion on this. And these are tricks, right? What if I told you my argument is boys are faster than girls and girls are smarter than boys? What do you think of that as an argument? And this is a trick. I'm telling you already, it's a trick.
I don't think it's a very good argument.
Anybody else want to add to that?
You don't have any facts.
Well, that's true too.
Apples to oranges are two different.
Okay.
There's no premises. There's just a conclusion.
You're getting it. So it's not an argument. I made statements. And even if I want to go deeper, I don't even really know what those mean. Boys are faster than girls. At what? And reading. And answering questions. Girls are smarter than boys. Smarter in what way? I mean, you know what I mean. So we'll learn as we move through here that first of all, that's not even an argument. Now, why is this important? Because half the time what we are hearing is people having exclamations, right? They make statements. Slogans, you'll find out, are a fallacy. They don't tell us anything. So you hit the nail on the head when you start talking about premises and conclusions. Okay. Music from the 1970s is better than today's music. Today, most young people don't like music from the 1970s. Young people back then had better taste than people today. It's a valid argument. It's a weak argument. You'd have to agree with the premise, first of all. You may not agree that music from the 70s is better than today, if you agree with that. So even if it's a valid argument, which we can argue on the premises, it's very weak, all right? It's very weak. But nonetheless, at least it's an argument. You know, if somebody came up to you and said, you know, boys are faster than girls, you wouldn't even quite know. You'd have to start asking all kinds of questions to even know what we're talking about. At least if somebody said this, you might respond, well, I don't think music from the 70s is better than today. Okay, so we at least can get that far.
You wrote these?
I wrote, yeah, I
Do
did.
you think those 70s music is better?
Well, I do. You know, I like Motown in through the 70s. Once you get into the 80s, I started losing some of it. But anyway. But I like some music today. God cannot be proven to exist. So if you want to be intellectual and not stupid, do not believe in God's existence. All right? Now here, we're going to have to start arguing terms. When you use the word proven, what do you mean by that? If we're talking empirically, all right, then I at least agree with you that God cannot empirically be shown to exist. I don't think that reaches the same conclusion because this is not an empirically provable situation. In other words, I can't prove to you my wife loves me. It has nothing to do with whether or not she does or not. I just can't prove it. As a matter of fact, you know, we'll see that, you know, logic can really lead us to truth and it really can help us think clearly, but it's not going to win some of the greatest things in our lives: beauty, truth, goodness, love, equality, justice, you know, hope. These things are not ideas, if we'll call them that can be proven empirically, right? But nonetheless, you know, have I heard that argument? Many times. You know, I can't believe you believe in God. Prove to me He exists. Prove to me that Jesus was ever real. I mean, you'll see next semester when we start looking at culture and philosophy, that was Descartes' issue. His problem was, how do I know you're even here? In fact, he didn't know that you were even here. He just figured that there was a God, and God wouldn't allow him to be deceived. And that was his explanation. You know? So, you know, we have to watch. So it's an argument, but it's got a faulty premise, and it's, you know, rather weak. But do people use it? Yes. Are you going to convince them otherwise? Well, you might have a shot on this one, all right? How about this? Penguins are black and white. Some old TV shows are black and white. Therefore, penguins are old TV shows. It's got two premises and a conclusion. Now, again, these are tricks. If you got this one right, I would bow to you right now, all right? You know it's wrong, though, right? I mean, you look at it, you know it's wrong. You can't say why it's wrong. It has an undistributed middle. Now, that means nothing to you right now, but...
Is it? I don't know.
Well, I just told you, it has an undistributed middle. In other words, you know, you have major and minor premises, and the middle term is the term that appears twice in the premises but never in the conclusion. Don't write any of this down. We're going to get it all over and over and over. That term has to be distributed once. It happens to be in a position in both premises where it's never been distributed. So therefore, even though you know it's wrong, that is why it's wrong, okay? Now, we could probably swap that around. We could probably make it look valid, but then one of the premises would not be true. Like if I try to say everything is black and white are penguins, that might make the argument valid, but the premise isn't true, right? Because at least then that term has been distributed once. So anyway, but a lot of humor is based on this. You know, it sounds right, but you know it's wrong, but yet it's funny, okay? But a good logician will be able to tell you exactly why that's incorrect, or in this particular instance, invalid. So I used to play poker with this guy, and he'd come in, and this is what he would say each time he'd walk in. Well, I just made it for you for class. Do you feel a lot more like you do now than when you first came into class? Huh, Christian? Do you feel more like you do now than you first came into class? It's nonsensical, all right? Sometimes, and some particular philosophers are geniuses at this, they can string words together that just sound like you're missing something, but there's nothing there. You guys know who Henry Kissinger is, back from the 1970s. His line, he was a politician, his line was, you know, the nice thing about being famous is that when you are hard to understand, everybody assumes it's their problem, that they don't understand you. But it's probably just you're not making any sense, okay? So anyway, thinking about thinking. Either you are going to approach the world where you're going to, how is it I construct my thoughts with clarity? How is it that I put these premises into true statements? And how is it that I develop arguments that are just valid and obviously, you know, reasonable and strong? So my goal for you guys is to have a value that you give the world. No one's going to be able to understand that, and nor will you contribute well if it's not done well, right? So I don't know what field you would go into and you don't use this. Okay, so what good is logic? All right. So there's the dreaded ... See if I can find my... There it is. Here's the problem. I don't have like something to complete. I just have a thought that comes after it. You and I, we always act in accordance to how we understand things. How I understand the world affects how I act and the decisions that I make. And so do you. That's only reasonable. Well, thinking contributes to how you understand the world. So if you don't see things, I mean, all the issues, again, that we'll study next semester that come up, usually come from faulty thinking. So this is important. If you want to understand the world well, then you need orderly thinking that contributes to that understanding. Okay? I am very interested in you being persuasive in your speech, because I think that you're going to have something solid to contribute to the world. So if you have something solid to contribute to the world, whether it be verbally or in writing or in art media, I'm hoping that you can communicate that. But you need to understand the rules of persuasion. What this is not to be used for is to control others. Okay? We are not out to simply win arguments. I especially think that when it comes to so-called apologetics in Christianity, if I could win you with an argument, it's only going to be good until somebody much brighter and smarter than me comes along, which may not be that long, and wins you back out of that argument. All right? Because you'll see, too, that logic, we're incarnate beings. I'll show you that in the last slide. So we go beyond all of this. But the reality is, there's a word for people who simply teach others to win arguments. It's called sophistry. Socrates condemned it. It's the bad name some lawyers get, right? So did anybody ever see the movie Devil's Advocate? How do you say his name? Keanu Reeves? I can't ever say his first name. Is it Keanu? Keanu Reeves. He was in it. There's a couple other stars. Al Pacino was in it. The basic premise of it wasn't the premise, but the line that worked him into plot was he was a young lawyer, never lost, and he managed to get a child rapist off because the girl who he raped had special needs, and he was able to twist the logic and twist the words to make her look foolish. That's bad, okay? We're not supposed to be out there trying to do that. This is supposed to be going after truth. This is supposed to help us grow in wisdom, not simply to control others. We don't like it. Remember I told you yesterday, and maybe you found it funny, that if you understand this well, you'll be immune from advertising. If that sounds funny to you, I don't know why. I mean, how many people are buying those, what I call those cheap canvas high-top Converse sneakers? Because some famous person wore them. You guys need to know something. I grew up poor. We used to have to shop in the shopping baskets that were out front of the Army-Navy stores. And in those shopping carts were like 3 different color canvas Converse sneakers. And they were the $5 sneakers. So you'd bring them before school, and my mom would say, pick it out. There was red, white, and green, I think. Pick out one of them. Now, people are paying 80, 90, 100 bucks for it. It's funny. Me and my wife laugh about it. We're like, that's the stuff we couldn't wait to have enough money to stop buying, and all they did was get somebody else to promote it and charge more for it. Now people think it's worth something. Do you feel good about that? You've been taken. I mean, that's all that is. Rationality and logic would bring you in and say, there's no way I'm buying that. Why? Because that guy wore it? It means something to me? Yeah.
With that same line of thinking, is it possible that you still buy it only to keep it and use it to sell it later on for a higher price?
Well, if you could do that, sure.
Which is what my brother is doing. He grabs the limited edition ones, saves them, and he may sell them later on.
Okay, so he's looking at collectors, I'm just looking to go to Famous Footwear, whatever it is, and you just have them on the rack. So, yeah, if a guy's a collector, he sees the value in it, that he thinks he can make something on the
He
future.
sees the value. I don't go for the expensive.
Well, I buy all my clothes at Goodwill. I know what you're thinking. How can you dress this nice and buy your clothes at Goodwill? But that being said, that's a joke. You can laugh. But that being said, typically speaking, we're just being sold a bill of goods. And this happens in politics. This happens in advertising. It happens all over the place. We've got to get beyond all this stuff, right? I mean, we can make fun of all the politics that's going on now. You really think it was that much worse than it was 10 years ago? No. I mean, this stuff has been going on forever, right? People are buying into slogans, and we never look beyond the slogan. We look there. All they are is exclamatory sentences, right? And and who disagrees with them? So with Obama, he was trying to sell hope. Well, what are you going to be against hope? Well, with Trump, he's trying to say America's great again. What are you going to make America bad? I mean, on the surface, these are not good things, but people buy into this stuff, right? So we've got to get to the point where, sorry, I need some meat. I'm not interested in all this stuff. What can you tell me? And that's across the board. It's not just politics, obviously. So let's say what logic is. Let's define logic. We're just going to say logic is the science and the art of argument. And I'll define argument then. So logic is the science and the art of argument. So it is a science, right? But not science like empirical science. It's science as in the pursuit of knowledge. Like theology is a rigorous science, right? But it's not physical science. We've got that kind of confused in our head. And it's an art. So you've got to get good at it. It's a performance art thing. Not just because, again, you're a mathematical mind doesn't mean that you're going to be very good at living out in the world in a rational way. So it's the science and the art and logic. The science and the art of argument. I had those out of line. What is an argument? Let's say an argument is a form of reasoning. An argument is a form of reasoning. And Ed already filled it in the gaps for this. It's a form of reasoning where you have a conclusion based on more than at least two premises. We'll say it that way. An argument is a form of reasoning where you have a conclusion, let's say, that's supported by at least two premises. The classic one, and everybody's always going to hear this, even if you take logic in college, all men are mortal. That is a proposition. Who's going to disagree with that? Socrates is a man. Another one. Who's going to disagree with that? If all men are mortal and Socrates is a man, then Socrates is mortal. I don't agree with the conclusion. Sorry, you don't have that option. If you agree with both premises and the conclusion naturally comes from that, you have to accept it or just admit you're unreasonable. All right? That's part of the problem. So, now a sophist would trap you, right? They would manipulate, and you see this all the time with news, right? They'll ask a series of questions, and then they'll draw a conclusion from the questions that you've asked or you've answered. And either they're equivocating, where words don't mean the same thing, or they're pulling the all penguins are black and white deal, where there's something in distribution. But it sounds right, and if you already agree because you have a confirmation bias, hey, I can't stand a guy, so I agree with anything anybody says against him. I mean, that comes out of us pretty easy, right? So that's why we do this. So, and just know that it's an art, okay? Don't forget that part. Now, let's just ask ourselves, why would we need sound reasoning for a democratic society? By the way, does anybody want to venture a guess why Socrates did not like democracies? Yes.
Because people could be easily misinformed.
They could. He's absolutely right. But let's even take it more personal. What happened to him? Do you know what happened to Socrates?
He was voted. Or
They-
did they? I don't know. If they voted him to death.
Yeah, well, kind of. He had to drink. Tea, right? So he had to drink hemlock tea. In a sense, he was executed per se, even though it was voluntary. He could have ran away, but he didn't because he thought that was improper. So here's a guy, one of the wisest guys to walk the earth, and he was put to death by the people. Do you know what he was put to death for? I have a T-shirt that says this.
He was teaching the. They didn't like what he was teaching the kids. Around.
Absolutely, corrupting the youth. He corrupted the youth of Athens with reason alone. Now, if somebody doesn't believe in a God, picture this. Here you have Athens with a plethora of gods, and he concludes that cannot be so. There must be one God, and it must be a good God. Now, that wasn't the Christian God. We can't make that jump. That's pretty good. He did that by reason alone. He was considered an atheist. See, atheism is always relative to the culture, right? So in our culture, if you don't believe in any God, you're atheistic. But if you're in a pantheon of gods and you only believe in one, you're an atheist, right? So he was an atheist, corrupted the youth, must be put to death, that type of thing. So anyway, in a democratic society, you can only imagine how this will come into play. In other words, if we are not informed, right, we always hear that, you need to be informed. We need more than information. We need people who are reasonable, who work through things. We need to do better than simply have some newscaster, because, this is the problem. If you guys had Sparks, I know you've heard this. You know that most of the news programs are actually classified as entertainment. You're not watching the news. You're being entertained. And let's just say it. If you're a conservative, you're watching Fox, and if you're a liberal, you're watching MSNBC. That's what's happening. We love confirmation bias. I want to hear my point of view. It's very rare. Now, if you go to there's a news, it's not a news organization, but there's an organization that actually puts them on the spectrum. I mean, if we're going to say everybody has a bias, and let's find out what that bias is. And by the way, one thing I at least would go this far is that, MSNBC and Fox News aren't monolithic. Within their programming is a whole variety, right? So you do have to take that into consideration. There's editorials, there's journalists, and there's news hours. Usually the news hours are better on both sides. But nonetheless, we have to raise the bar, us. And we need to do that first by asking you, there are bad questions to ask, right? This is going to help you formulate questions. And there's no other way. This is not going to make you a free individual in society. I mean, we are given this freedom, liberty, if you want to call it, in our state. We need to use it to exercise.
What would you like us to write for last?
There's all kinds of stuff. Let's just say, you can't, unless we can get to good information, you cannot be free. Knowledge and freedom go together. If I told you, let me put it this way, well, let's say Christian, he needs a new car. And I said, hey, I got a car, I'll sell you. I'll sell it to you for $3,000. Yes or no? Would you say yes or no?
Yes.
Without even asking me anything? That's not free. What would you say, Christian?
I would ask if there's anything wrong with the car, how many miles are on.
Right. You'd start asking all kinds of questions. Why? Because he wants to make a free, informed choice. Unless we are asking good questions, he wouldn't ask me things like, well, does it have bumper stickers? Does it come with the magnet? That stuff doesn't matter, right? He has to ask good questions. So we need to do that. So our freedom is connected to the knowledge we're looking for. Obviously, the higher you are in this orderly thinking, the less you're going to be tied into this, what we call crowd mentality, right? Following the masses. I mean, it's easy to do. So even where there's very hard things, like oftentimes, and you guys are probably already picking up on this, you wish the news would just, you wish there was like a 2 or 48-hour delay. Just wait until you really know. Everything's breaking news. Breaking news. This person's getting ready to talk. Who cares? I don't know who is that person. I don't even know. So we get this in our heads that this information somehow makes us, participant in the political system. Probably not true. All right. So it's going to help us in that. Because in other words, we don't want to be sheep, right? We don't want to be sheep that are herded. So there's really no definitive thing there. Okay. So do not write down this first little block. This comes from John Paul II's Fides Ratio. Now, I know those that had me last year, I said this, but perhaps, we don't quite grasp it. With John Paul II and with Benedict XVI, we had probably one of the greatest theological minds that sat in that chair for 300-400 years. With John Paul II, we had probably one of the greatest philosophical minds that sat in that chair for 300 or 400 years. We just don't know it. I mean, you may not know because you didn't study it, and other people don't think about it. But these guys were giants, giants, right? John Paul II with his background in philosophy, wrote, what is the connection between faith and reason? So here in the opening blessing, he talks about faith and reason being like two wings, which the human spirit rises in the contemplation of truth. So God has placed in our heart this desire, right? And in a word, we want to know ourselves, so that by knowing and loving God, men and him may also come to the fullness of truth about themselves. All right? So we're on this exploratory life where we're constantly asking questions. We're an inquiring type of people, okay? Now, I want you to know this, because this is important. You guys heard this over and over last year when I did sacraments. What did I say a sign was? A sign represents something other than itself to a knowing power. Without reasoning abilities, how will you ever know what is behind that sign? So, for instance, even though it's a conventional sign, a stop sign. Yes, we know that it means for us to stop at that point. We also know there's an authority of the municipality or the borough behind it, which will be enforced by law enforcement if we just buzz through it. Okay? We are knowing powers. We get what is behind there. We would even go so far to be reasonable to say it's necessary. Because if you take all these signs down, we're going to have anarchy, and how would this intersection work? Everybody would just go all over. People are going to get hurt. That's not freedom. That's just lack of restraint. So we would understand as knowing powers what is behind that sign. A camel's not going to know that. You can put a sign in the middle of the desert. A camel's not going to look at it and stop. There's no knowing power there. When we talked about the Eucharist and bread, I said the same thing. What does bread do? It feeds us, it sustains us. Okay, so that's what the Eucharist does on a supernatural level. You have to be a knowing power for that, all right? So the reality is that we will never grasp the meaning behind these signs unless we are knowing powers. Our bodies are signs. What does this mean? Okay, what possibly could our bodies tell us? These, I just gave two blocks. One, credo ut intelligam. It just means I believe so that I understand. Or know, however you want to say it. I'm not sure how he translates it. I believe so that I may understand. And then he gives three reasons for why we would say this. I'm just trying to throw in a little theology here throughout this logic. First of all, if you had me last year for morality, you know about the inclination to truth, the primary precepts of natural law. We will always search for truth without rest. We always want to know. If you're a proud person who only looks at the world as a conquest, there's no other way to say it. You're a fool, and it's not good to have you in our midst. All right? So, this understanding that I believe in order that I may know is not for the proud person. Now, you already see in that sentence there's something there about faith as a way of knowing. See, we live in a world where the people think the only way you can know is through empirical science. And that's sad. That has a lot of repercussions, by the way. We know about faith is a way of knowing, intuition is a way of knowing. You know, intuition isn't, gee, I wonder what the lottery numbers are. Intuition is how we size up the situation, maybe like acumen, right? And the reason must recognize God's transcendent sovereignty. Now, I understand that if you're not Christian, that you wouldn't agree with that. But if you are Christian, you cannot not agree with that. All right? The reality is that if you believe we are incarnate beings, there is something transcendent of the human person. And I'll share with you, particularly next semester, how even atheists understand that. All right? You don't have to be a Christian to understand that there's something transcendent of the human person. As a matter of fact, even postmodern theology is always looking for something transcendent of the individual. So they start talking in things of immaterial materiality. You know, how can something, since there is no God, but there must be something out there that's not material. I mean, they'll still use that language. Why? They're searching for truth. They're searching for something outside of themselves. They just simply are too proud to think that it could be connected to God. And the last thing, intelligio credum, I understand so that I believe. So he's trying to say, you know, his basic point is there's absolutely no conflict between faith and reason. This whole thing about, well, how does the Catholic Church fit about evolution? You should have got that thing nailed in like 5th grade. I mean, on what level and in what area of science is the Catholic Church, you know, against? I'm not talking about practices or, you know, ethical things. There's a lot of stuff. Boy, I'll tell you, this year, me teaching the juniors going into morality and what's happening in reproductive sciences, unbelievable, some of the things that are going on, right? 3-parent embryos, artificial wounds. Yeah. Well, this is late stuff. This stuff's just coming out over summer, right? Yep. So anyway, reason has natural limitations, right? Our hearts can obscure things. And let's just face it. Socrates did pretty good to figure out there was one God and he was good. But, I'm not Socrates. And even if I were Socrates, my heart still has limitations. It can obscure things that otherwise faith can only reveal. I mean, you can study the Bible through and through. You're never going to come up with the Trinity. I mean, our understanding of the Trinity or transubstantiation, that comes from, that's revealed to us. Let's put it that way. Truth can drown in other concerns. Always. Always. Right? Sometimes it's just quite easy to get tied up in life. You get on the old treadmill, and before you know it, you're 50-some years old, and you're thinking to yourself, what have I done? I've accomplished a lot of things, I have a lot of things, but what have I done, right? And the last thing he talks about is people can run from the truth because of its demands. It's usually always the case. We are so good at convincing ourselves that, we're good the way we're at, because it requires nothing of us. So the juniors, did you guys do discussions in Deacon L? No, you're in this class, what am I saying? The other seniors are doing the discussion with him. I did it with just one period of juniors. So, I'm trying to get them to know that there's nothing you're going to say around me that's offensive. I don't want you, let me say it this way. I don't want you to be offensive or vulgar, but you're never going to say anything around me that I'm going to be shocked. I've heard it. So one of the questions was, what do you think if you were a non-Christian or a non-Catholic, how does the church look to you? Well, the kids said it looks cultish, looks too strict, looks stuck in its ways, it won't change. What do you want of the church? Let priests get married, let women be priests. They went down the list. All right? So the reality is, we could talk about all those things, and I will with them. But most of the stuff that requires something of us, that's what we don't like. Right? So you remember the relationality I showed you about not attending Mass on Sunday, right? I don't need to go to church because God knows that I love him. And I said, well, try that with your boyfriend or your girlfriend. Don't talk to them for 3 or 4 weeks. And if they say, why haven't you called me or texted me, just explain to them you like them, right? Because to admit that we must be in a relationship makes demands on us, and we don't often like that. So anyway, this wasn't supposed to be anything deep, anything profound. This was just an introduction onto, why are we doing this? Any questions, comments, concerns?
Have you played the game with the juniors?
Light applause. No, all I did with them was that. Remember we did those cryptograms?
Yeah, that's the game I was talking about.